clicker. So God's intentional is my talk for today, and it really came about over the past couple of months, just the experiences here in my professional life, also in my personal life, which I'll go into a little bit later with my own healing experience over the past 3 weeks or 2 weeks, actually. And really where now I get to see that everything is working for my good. Like, even if it shows up as disaster or catastrophe, that I can be certain that there's something there. There's a blessing always for me. And that God's grace is always sufficient for whatever is in front of me, whether it's big, small, whatever that looks like, that God is always there, present within me as me, paving the way, showing and pointing me towards the peaceful path, to whatever it is that my good entails. But I first wanted to start off with this little story, a fight to the death. And this really kind of illustrates just a parent, let's say God, or even a mother or father to its child. And what happened to me back in 2007. Now, I have a daughter, Leilani. She's 15 now, and most of you, I always bring her up in my sermons because I find that children actually are our best teachers. Relationships in general. As we work through them and build them and grow them, I find that relationships really do help me to really strengthen my resolve to just continue on touching the Christ within. So it's 2007. I believe Leilani was 4 or 5 years old, and I was babysitting a friend of hers as well. And I left them in the playroom to watch some television and play while I went outside and gardened. Well, for a while there, I could hear children playing. But then suddenly, guess what? I didn't hear. Exactly. So that noise that you just heard right there, with nobody responding, that was what I heard. When children, and parents, please attest to this if you can, when children are suddenly silent, you know stuff is going down, don't you? You know that somebody's getting into something. They are doing something that could either cause somebody to lose an eye, a limb, something, a break, a priceless vase. So all of a sudden, I heard nothing. And then a couple of moments later, I heard, "Surrender, or you will die," or something like that. And I flew into the house, knowing that Leilani was up to something with her friend Elena. And as soon as I went into the playroom, I saw that they both had sabers to each other's throats. So they had these swords. Now, sabers, as you may or may not know, they're not sharp on the edges, but they are pointed. They're ceremonial for purposes. I was in charge of the honor guard at the time, and sometimes I would leave my equipment at home. She must have seen a movie where they were fighting to the death, and so she decided that her and her friend Elena were going to reenact this. As soon as I went in there, I took those sabers as they had them pointed toward the jugulars of each other, just to save their lives. And in that moment that I saved their lives, they didn't even realize that I was saving their lives. They threw the biggest fit I have ever seen little children throw, because I took away their shiny, good new toy. And how appropriate is that? So even in our adult lives, it seems that these shiny sabers that we have in our own lives, when it's been eliminated from our lives, sometimes we throw a fit. It might look like a job, the best job you've ever had. But little did you know, if you would have continued on that job, your relationship might have failed, your health through working so much or worrying so much might have failed, and then you could not continue on the purpose that you were set forth to do. Or even a relationship that you've been involved in for a while. Have you ever been in a relationship where things just don't seem to work out? Every other week is a new set of circumstances. Things are just diminishing and crumbling with every turn. And sometimes it's because God's grace does step in, takes the sabers from our hands, these sabers that we value so much, whether these are relationships or employment or what have you, or friendships, and says, "You know what, child, you do not know the type of harm you could cause by continuing to play with this saber." And so these things, through the grace of God, are seemingly completely stripped. And that's where despair might set in. Have you ever had a situation where you just didn't know why it happened? It just felt like your world was crumbling because something was at a loss. But then months later, you realize that that event right there, whatever it was the turning point for your new adventure and your new good. Does anybody have one of those instances where they could see something that was gone kind of miraculously and then suddenly, it just happens. And just know that all things were working together for your good in that moment. That sometimes we create these lives or these situations, or we value things that are valueless, and that could actually end up preventing us from going on and elevating to the next phase of our being. And so that is grace ultimately, where what I've created, God steps in, that consciousness steps in and rearranges things because I did not create so well for myself. Now, when I look to this topic, I often go and I turn to the Bible whenever I'm going into a sermon because I believe the Bible is very valuable. It teaches us or has these lessons that have been learned. There's solutions in there. There's everything that you ever needed to know about life's problems. I don't care what it shows up as. It's there in some story in the Bible. And so I went to Exodus for this particular one because when I started on my spiritual journey, I really did feel like a child of Israel going through this wilderness. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was a bit scared. I questioned everything, but in the end, I decided that by faith and faith alone, I was just going to step forward. And so when we meet Moses, we realize that he is in an unusual situation as well. First of all, he was born a Hebrew during the time where it was very unfashionable to be born Hebrew. The Hebrew nation, basically, they went to Egypt under Jacob and became very comfortable with their living situation. They procreated and gained masses of people, and the Pharaoh at the time realized and in fear that you know what? These people could form their own nation, their own army, and take over. So what did the Pharaoh do? The Pharaoh enslaved them. They were forced to create bricks for basically the rest of their lives. And that's what they did. So now we have an enslaved Hebrew nation, and they're in Egypt. And another thing the Pharaoh did was says the firstborn, male-born of the family would have to die. And most often, they were thrown into the Nile. Well, Moses' mother, having compassion for her firstborn son, put him in a basket and set him off on the river near where the royalty lived, where the Pharaoh's family was at. And they took him in and basically grew him from a baby. And the added bonus with her following her intuition, she was actually asked to nurse him during the weaning years for his own mother. So what an incredible story of how things just lined up into place while she followed her intuition. It seemed like an impossible situation, but there you go. Moses actually was able to be reared by his mother growing up. And Moses knew within his very depths that he was Hebrew. And one day, around the age of 40, he saw an Egyptian soldier beating on a Hebrew slave. And this enraged him. This was his people, and he saw an injustice happening. And so he killed this Egyptian soldier and fled the country because now he's in exile. He was sure that the Pharaoh was going to want him dead as well. So that for the next 40 years, he gets married and he becomes, he shepherds, flock. He's a shepherder for 40 years. So at 40 years old, his life doesn't turn around. Most of us think 40 is the mid-year or midlife crisis, correct? Where we just, after that, who knows what will happen from there? Do millionaires happen after 40? Who knows? But Moses, his adventure began at 40. And so he spent the next 40 years lonely as a shepherd, contemplating, communing with God. I can imagine that there was a lot of forgiveness for the death that that happened to the Egyptian soldier. And through this time of being and communing with God and doing these things and being in that sacred space, he rose in consciousness enough to be trusted with an important mission to free the Hebrew people, the Hebrew slaves themselves out of Egypt. A man who once was exiled would now be tasked to go in and bring those people to the promised land. And what he saw as he went to Mount Sinai one night was that, or I think it was Horeb, he saw a burning bush. Now, in the Middle East, that's actually not rare to see a burning bush. It actually happens naturally because of the heat and the gases that come off of some of the bushes, a particular bush, matter of fact. But what was unusual was that the bush started speaking to him. Now, if you're ever out there in the desert and a bush starts speaking to you, you're probably dehydrated or something like that. But Moses recognized that this was the voice of the Most High. First of all, he was told that where he was standing was holy ground. Wherever you're at, wherever you find your feet land, you are standing on holy ground because God is everywhere present. And he got to realize this. And then he was given a task. He was told that he was going to go to the Pharaoh and ask that the Hebrew slaves be freed. Now, how many times have you had this hunch to do something? Have you had this inner calling to proceed forward in whatever that is, a business venture, maybe leaving a place and starting somewhere new, and you've given yourself plenty of excuses? Well, Moses did the same thing. First excuse, who am I to appear before the Pharaoh? Well, who are you not? What is your self-worth about? You are the son of the Most High. You are a child of God. And when God calls you, God equips you as well. His second excuse, they won't believe me that the Most High, that God sent me. Oh, believe me, they will. When God calls you, like I said, everything will be given. And I'm clumsy with words. His last excuse as to why he could not go on to fulfill his destiny, why he could not really take on that command that was in his heart and go forward. We've often given ourselves less of excuses to why we can't go on to greatness. Maybe there's not enough time, maybe you don't have enough energy, or you don't believe you have enough resources. And just like Moses, we start to doubt ourselves and give ourselves excuses as to why something cannot be done. But in the end, Moses realized, and he was promised, that with this vision, provisions will come. And there we go. So provisions are always given when you have a vision. With him, because he did stutter a bit and he didn't have the right words, he was given his brother to speak on his behalf. These things were already figured out. The path forward has already been made clear for you. There might be some things that come up in it, but believe me, the path that God puts you on is the path you're supposed to be on. The right type of obstacles are there, or challenges. These things that will help grow you spiritually, they're there. The Most High knows exactly what you need and what your mission and purpose is. And realize that it may not be the path that is the most quickest. So Moses goes in there. 10 catastrophes had to happen in order for the Pharaoh to say, finally, I'm going to let these people go. They are more hassle than anything else. And they leave. But they were told they could not take the quickest route. They didn't know at the time, but on the quickest route was another enemy. And had they had gone there days later, they had just left bondage. They needed rest. And the Most High knew this, that universal mind knows when rest is needed and when you're ready to go forward and face certain things. And so the Philistines were on the path if they were going to go and take the beeline to the promised land. So they were told to go around. And this was not something that sat well with the children of Israel. Now, the children of Israel were real irritating to Moses as well. If you read, you'll see that he was constantly complaining because they were just doing and saying things that just weren't in alignment what he felt his mission was. But they were much of a blessing to him as he was to them. And so the children of Israel represent these thoughts in our mind. If we're tasked to do something, the complaining mind, the mind that knows that something must be done, but it complains the entire way. It starts to doubt, it starts to deny, and it's like that 5-year-old that you take the saber away from. It starts to throw itself on the ground and throw a fit. There's something in it that is really awakening to what its call is. But until it has the spiritual maturity to do so, it'll be in that state of consciousness. And this is what the children of Israel represented. So how fitting that Moses got to take along anywhere from 60,000 to 600,000 Israelites, depending on which scholar you speak to. Now, in the beginning as well, you may need reassurance. And in Matthew 7:8, it says, asking ye shall receive. Whenever you need to know something, ask. The Bible also tells us that you have not because you ask not. Always ask what your next move is. Always ask what the peaceful and right direction would be. You will be given that answer. That same indwelling Christ that abides within all of your spiritual gurus out there abides in you as well. Tap into it through your spiritual practices. And Moses, just every time we start to get away from our spiritual practice. So Moses representing the spiritual authority, every time he left to commune, the children of Israel ran wild. They started doing idol worship again. They just went back. They backtracked in their spiritual progression. And we are always called that no matter what is happening day to day, moment to moment, always remember to touch the Christ through prayer, through meditation on a daily basis. A few weeks ago, I had something happen to where I was reminded the importance of doing that. For the past couple of months, I became so busy that I was not practicing my meditation, going into prayer as often as I should have been. And these things manifested in my outer realm where I had to be hospitalized for a couple of days because I forgot the truth of my very being. And that's the truth of it. These things hadn't happened before in my life, but I had always been on my game. And because I gave myself excuses that I'm working late, that I'll get to it tomorrow, that some other time I'm just too busy, well, that busyness got me real silent and still for a while. And I got to face some things within myself. And the busier you are, the more time you should make for your spiritual practices. Trust me, it will help to resolve those things that you don't see manifesting just yet. It will help to resolve those things within you before they show themselves in an outward appearance in your life. And you play an important role in your life, in everyone else's, since we are connected, all of us, to that one body of Christ. We have this domino effect on one another. The moment you say no to your good, it affects the whole. The moment that I say, you know what, that's just too much for me to do, that doesn't feel comfortable, maybe tomorrow, there's a ripple effect that happens. You don't know where you are at in that sequence of events. We are not given that type of insight. But know that you are playing such a special role in this entire construct and consciousness that your piece of the puzzle missing would completely affect everything else, the complete picture. There is also some truths revealed as well. Remember that bondage is not from the highest. Whenever you feel that you're constrained, constricted, confined in something, whether it's a job, relationship, that is not of God. Spirit may be telling you it's time to go. You may be getting your pink slip and not even be realizing it and just denying it. So always take those hunches. Always realize that those universal hunches are coming to you. Your good is always working for you. You just have to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And understanding God's laws, and they were given by Moses, these laws of thou shalt not kill and treat your neighbor nicely, all these wonderful things we learned when we were 5 years old. Apply them to your life now. They still work. These are universal principles. And these are laws. God is law. And the moment that we go against law is the moment that we go against God. Now, for the visual learners, I want to show you just a little something, your infinite good. So I say all things are working together for your good. God's intentional. But what does this look like on a piece of paper? Well, here's your infinite good. It's blank. It has all these possibilities. And since we like stick figures around here, here's a stick figure of you or me or whoever that would be. And you are open to that realm, everything. You are part of that piece of paper, all that flow, all that goodness. However, there's certain things that we build around ourselves, beliefs, judgments on people, our unwillingness to forgive somebody. These things are actual barriers and blocks to our good, to feeling that everything is working for our good. And what we're called to do is to look at those things. And these things start most times while we were children, very young children, through the things that our parents or other adults or friends had said to us or impressed upon our subconscious. True or untrue, but something that we took in and called a belief of ours. And so we're called to rewrite the script. Rewriting the script in your life is something that you'll find is really freeing. You may not know that you have a certain belief about yourself, because first start with the self. What am I holding to be true about my power or God's power within me? Start to look at those things, and here's what it would look like. An example, a negative attribute about yourself, something that you believe. Oh, I'm very impatient, or I'm lazy, or whatever that is. But then on the opposite side, write down what the positive attribute would be. From there, cross your ankles or wrists, clasp your hands together in your lap, and look at your list and see the ideal words written there for each line, one at a time. And close your eyes and say, I am willing to see myself as patient, or supporting something that you're willing to see, some truth that you're willing to hold for yourself. Now you're going to become your own best friend, because up until this point, if it didn't seem that God was intentional, if it didn't seem that all things were working for your good, it's because you were actively working against yourself with your own beliefs or your own resentment. Here are signs that you accepted this idea into your subconscious, that your shoulders relax, that you're more easily willing to accept these things, that suddenly the voice doesn't come up and say, well, no, that's not true. You're still not forgiven because you didn't, forgive John from 1962, so that's still part of you too. No, this is something when none of that can arise. And as Jesus said in the Bible, how long does it take? Well, 70 times 7. As many times as it takes. As many times as it comes up is as many times as you need to do the work. And so this is a practice that you would have to do over and over again. And so just continue on whenever it does come up and looking at these beliefs. Believe me, the more that you can free yourself and open yourself up to that blank piece of paper where your infinite good is there, always available to you, the more you will see, the more that you will feel that God is intentional, and that all things, all manner of things, are working together for your good. Thank you.